The Deadliest Catch family has been rocked by an unthinkable tragedy, as one of their bravest and most dedicated fishermen lost his life in a catastrophic turn of events at sea. What began as an ordinary day of hauling crab pots soon spiraled into a fight for survival amidst one of the most dangerous storms they had ever faced. The sheer unpredictability of the ocean turned routine into disaster, leaving the crew and viewers grappling with heartbreak and disbelief. How did everything go so wrong, so quickly? Let's unravel the chain of events leading to a moment that forever changed the lives of everyone on board. It all began as Jake's crew embarked on what they thought would be a historic day. With almost 60 pots already hauled and stacked, their gamble of heading further northwest in search of crabs had paid off in spades. The nets were fuller than anyone could have imagined, brimming with 200 to 300 crabs per haul, a jackpot that could set them up for the season. For hours, the crew worked tirelessly, energized by the promise of a massive payday. The Bering Sea, known for its brutality, had seemingly granted them a rare gift. Yet, as every seasoned fisherman knows, the sea's generosity is fleeting, and danger is always lurking beneath the surface. Without warning, the weather turned. The calm seas were replaced by towering waves, the sky darkened, and a relentless wind whipped across the deck. Rain fell sideways, drenching the crew as they scrambled to secure their catch. The storm was ferocious, but the urgency to finish their work outweighed their fear. Every second counted. The men worked with precision, their movements honed by years of experience, but the worsening conditions made even the simplest tasks perilous. In the midst of the chaos, an ominous beep from the sonar cut through the roaring storm. Captain Jake's instincts, honed over decades at sea, told him something was wrong. It wasn't a sound they'd encountered before, and its unfamiliarity sent a ripple of unease through the crew. Jake knew better than to ignore the warning signs of the ocean. He ordered everyone to prepare for the worst, his voice rising above the storm as he emphasized the importance of keeping the anchor cable tight. A loose cable could lead to the winch tearing off the ship, a disaster that would endanger them all. Tensions on the deck escalated as the crew fought against the storm. Waves pounded the ship with the force of a battering ram, and the rain obscured their vision. Suddenly, the cable jerked violently, nearly pulling a deckhand overboard. The heart-stopping moment left the crew frozen in terror for a split second, a grim reminder of the razor-thin line between life and death on the Bering Sea. For Jake, the pressure to make the right decisions and keep his crew safe was mounting with every passing second. As if the storm wasn't enough, another ship, the Wizard, appeared dangerously close. Jake recognized the vessel immediately but had never seen it this close in such treacherous conditions. A collision seemed inevitable as the waves pushed the two ships toward each other. Both crews braced for impact, their panic palpable as they prepared for the worst. By some miracle, the vessels narrowly avoided a crash, but the near-miss rattled everyone. Jake had no time to address the situation with the Wizard's captain. His own crew was relying on him to navigate them through the storm and get them home safely. Then came the unthinkable. Amid the chaos, a crew member lost his footing on the slick deck. In an instant, he was gone, swallowed by the freezing waters of the Bering Sea. The crew stood in stunned silence, their worst nightmare unfolding before their eyes. They had seen men go overboard before, but the bitter cold and violent waves made survival nearly impossible. The celebration of their record-breaking haul now felt hollow, overshadowed by the devastating loss of one of their own. Jake knew he had to keep his crew moving, but the weight of the tragedy hung heavy over the ship. The men worked in somber silence, their minds racing with grief and fear. Each wave that struck the ship felt like a cruel taunt from the ocean, reminding them of its merciless power. Jake's voice broke through the gloom as he shouted orders, desperate to maintain focus and prevent further loss. But the tragedy had changed everything. The camaraderie and confidence that had fueled their efforts earlier in the day were replaced by a grim determination to survive. As the crew prepared to return to port, another eerie sound echoed from below the ship. This time, it wasn't the anchor or the cable, it was something far more unsettling. Jake was faced with an impossible decision: investigate the unknown threat or cut their losses and head home. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The crew watched anxiously, their faith in Jake unwavering, but their fear of the ocean's unpredictability growing with every passing moment. Meanwhile, the Wizard's captain dealt with his own crisis, furious over the near collision and shouting into the radio at Jake. The tension between the two captains was palpable, each trying to assert control in a situation where the ocean held all the power. The storm's fury spared no one, forcing both crews to confront the harsh reality of their profession. Back on Jake's ship, another wave nearly swept Jacob, a deckhand, overboard. He managed to grab the railing just in time, pulling himself back onto the deck with trembling hands. Despite his close call, Jacob forced a smile, a reflex born of years spent laughing off danger to keep fear at bay. Jake apologized, his voice filled with regret, but the crew could see the toll the day's events were taking on him. The tragedy wasn't confined to Jake's crew. On the summer bay, Captain Wild Bill faced his own crisis when a crew member fell into the freezing water while hauling pots. The man was rescued, but the shock of the icy sea left him shaken and weak. Across the fleet, the day's events served as a grim reminder of the risks they faced every time they ventured into the Bering Sea. For Jake and his crew, the ocean had claimed more than just a life. It had left an indelible scar on their spirits. The waves, once a source of livelihood, had turned into a force of destruction, reminding them of their vulnerability. As they headed back to port, their thoughts were consumed by grief, fear, and the haunting realization that the sea's power is both a blessing and a curse. The events of that fateful day will forever be etched in their memories, a stark reminder of the price they pay in their dangerous fight against the sea. The Bering Sea had proven its unforgiving nature once again. Wild Bill's crew had dodged a bullet, but they knew the sea rarely offered second chances. Pressing on through the chaos, they encountered another mishap. Nick, one of their most experienced deckhands, twisted his ankle. Amidst the storm, the injury was severe, and even Nick, as tough as he was, knew it might end his season. Captain Bill called down to check on him, fully aware of how vital Nick was to their operation. However, with the storm raging, getting Nick off the boat wasn't an option. They could only hope he'd endure until they returned to port. Meanwhile, Captain Harley of the Southern Wind faced his own trouble. While attempting to maneuver around Summer Bay at the dock, his boat collided with the other vessel. Though the damage wasn't catastrophic, tempers flared. Harley blamed the wind, as he often did, but everyone knew his misjudgment played a significant role. The sea's unpredictability might be inevitable, but some mistakes were entirely avoidable, and this was one of them. The next day brought a deceptive calm. Captain Keith of the Ocean Challenger received a distress call from a nearby boat in trouble. He had just been laughing with his family over the radio, but the tone shifted instantly. The storm was closing in, and time was running out. The distress call wasn't just a plea for help. It was a sobering reminder of the dangers they faced daily. Keith's heart sank as he considered the slim odds of survival for the men overboard. The freezing water and relentless waves were unforgiving adversaries. He looked out over the horizon, heavy with the unspoken fear that their own distress call might be next. On the Cornelia Marie, Captain Josh faced a grim injury when deckhand Taylor got his finger caught in the coiler. The machinery, indifferent to human caution, left Taylor with a serious wound. Captain Casey stepped in to treat the injury, improvising with limited tools. The crew gathered in tense silence, knowing that a man down meant more strain for everyone else. The storm raged on, compounding their challenges. Taylor's injury was a stark reminder of the sea's ruthless nature. As the week dragged on, the men of Summer Bay, Saga, and Cornelia Marie bore the brunt of exhaustion, injuries, and relentless waves. Each captain, Jake, Wild Bill, Keith, Harley, faced challenges that pushed them to their limits. They battled the elements, near collisions, and personal losses, all in the name of survival. The Bering Sea showed no mercy, and the toll it took on their spirits and bodies was a constant reminder of its power. For these crews, fishing wasn't just a livelihood. It was a test of endurance. They went out for the thrill, the money, and the pride of their work, but sometimes the cost was unbearable. Each captain knew that the sea didn't offer second chances lightly. Yet they pressed on because stopping meant defeat and survival meant everything. Even as the Cornelia Marie navigated treacherous underwater currents, Captain Josh and his crew fought to stay on course. The instruments worked overtime, and the crew braced against the relentless waves. Suddenly, a powerful current pulled the boat off course, throwing the crew into chaos. With teamwork and precise action, they managed to regain control, but the ordeal left them shaken. Relief was fleeting. The sea never gave them time to rest. On the Wizard, Captain Keith faced worsening conditions. Visibility was near zero, rain lashed the wheelhouse, and waves grew taller with every passing minute. When another distress call came in from a smaller boat, Keith knew the Coast Guard was stretched too thin to respond quickly. Against the odds, he decided to take action, rallying his crew to attempt a rescue. Despite their own exhaustion and the storm's fury, they prepared to risk everything to save lives, knowing all too well how high the stakes were on the Bering Sea. The crew of the Wizard was battered and bruised from the relentless assault of the waves. But when Captain Keith's voice crackled over the radio, there was no hesitation. They exchanged determined nods, bracing themselves for the challenge ahead. They had survived storms before and knew what it took to make it through. This time, it wasn't just about survival, it was about saving lives. Turning straight into the storm, the Wizard plunged into danger, embodying the bravery and sacrifice required when lives hang in the balance. Keith pushed the throttle forward, the bow slicing through the waves with purpose. On deck, the crew moved swiftly, securing loose equipment and preparing for the worst. The wind howled, a deafening roar that seemed to echo the fury of the storm itself. Keith's eyes were glued to the radar, scanning for any sign of the distressed vessel. In these conditions, close was a relative term, and time was running out. Through the mist and rain, they finally spotted it. A small fishing boat, barely holding together as waves crashed over its hull. Keith maneuvered the Wizard as close as he dared, shouting instructions over the radio for the crew to prepare. It was a dangerous operation. One misstep could lead to disaster. Lines were thrown, ropes snapped in the wind, and the deckhands fought to maintain their footing on the slick, storm-lashed surface. Slowly but surely, they pulled the smaller boat closer. One by one, the stranded crew members climbed aboard the Wizard, exhausted but alive. Keith watched the last man make it across and felt a wave of relief. Though the storm still raged, they had saved them. The return journey was treacherous, the storm refusing to relent, and Keith couldn't shake the thought of how close they had come to catastrophe. On deck, the rescued crew huddled together, their faces pale and fearful. They had been lucky, but luck wasn't a resource anyone could rely on in the Bering Sea. Elsewhere, on the Summer Bay, Captain Wild Bill faced his own crisis as the storm unleashed its fury. The waves battered the boat, icy water flooding the deck and turning every movement into a risk. The crew, already exhausted, struggled to keep going. They had pulled one man out of the water earlier, and the thought of another accident loomed over them. Then, a massive wave swept across the deck, knocking a deckhand off his feet. He slid dangerously close to the edge, clawing for a handhold. From the wheelhouse, Bill watched in horror as the man managed to grab a railing and pull himself back to safety. It was a close call, a reminder that they were pushing their luck. Bill ordered the crew to secure the gear and prepare to head back to port. Their relief was palpable as they worked quickly, knowing they had narrowly avoided tragedy. Turning the boat toward home, Bill couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and disappointment. They had done their job, but the cost had been high. The sea demanded more than they were willing to give, and they had barely made it out intact. Meanwhile, on the Cornelia Marie, Captain Josh and his crew continued to battle the storm. The relentless waves and howling wind turned the deck into a war zone. The crew worked tirelessly, their hands frozen and bodies aching, determined to finish hauling their last pots. Josh couldn't help but reflect on the lives the sea had claimed over the years. Friends, colleagues, men who had risked everything only to lose it all. The sea was a merciless force, indifferent to the dreams and sacrifices of those who sailed her waters. As the storm finally began to abate, the waves receded, and the wind died down, the men of the Wizard, Summer Bay, and Cornelia Marie looked back on one of the toughest weeks of their lives. They had lost a man, saved another, and skirted the edge of disaster more times than they cared to count. They had faced nature's fury head-on and emerged, battered but alive. The Bering Sea had shown them once again that survival wasn't guaranteed, and every decision carried the weight of life and death. Was this series of events a tragic consequence of nature's wrath, or could more have been done to prevent it? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the unforgiving waters of the Bering Sea.